Okay, what we're going to do in this section is we're going to actually create a remote repository and push all of our activity, all of our changes from our local repository up to the remote repository. So keep in mind that what we have right now is we have this local repository, this black box that contains not only the current version of all the code, and it records all the changes that happen to our application, but it contains the history of all the changes, which may be even more valuable than the actual current version. So right now, if my hard drive blows up, this code, all of it is gone forever. And again, the entire history of all the changes is gone. So one reason to establish a remote repository is so you can keep, a separate location for all that activity. And if your hard drive does blow up, it's a good sort of a disaster recovery / backup mechanism. Now, the other reason is if you're using source control with a team of people, then everybody needs one central place to push all their code. So the other, that one place is typically going to be this remote repository, and that's how distributed source control management systems work. Everybody has their own local repository, and they make their changes. They do their commits on their local hard drives. Their little local copy of the repository is their own, and when they're all good and ready, they will push all of their history, all their change sets up to the central repository, and then other people can pull those down. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so for our intents and purposes right now, what we want to do is connect our local repository to a remote repository. There are a lot of different places where you can purchase / get for free repository hosting. I use Bitbucket. It's free for up to 5 users and unlimited private repositories. And so I've logged into my Bitbucket, and I just go in here and I clicked on create, and I'm going to say, all right, this is going to be the demo repo, and it's going to be private. I'm using Mercurial simply because I've always used Mercurial. When I first did source control management with Domino Designer, I was just felt a little more comfortable with the setup that was available for Mercurial than for Git. But both those source control systems are very, very popular. Git probably more so. But the generic concepts that we're going to talk about, branching, etc., are going to be very, very similar. Of course, the setup would be slightly different. So we're going to go in here, and thankfully, due to David Leedy, we actually have an XPages choice in the language. He contacted the folks at Bitbucket, and they threw it in there. So I'm just going to make this repository in Bitbucket. It now just made my repository. If I go to here and look at the repository itself, since I haven't done anything, I'm not really going to have anything, but I'm going to go in here to make changes and push. And the most important thing is it's going to give me this URL that is the location of the remote repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my designer, and I'm going to say, all right, I am going to push my repository up to this remote repository. So I paste in the URL. It's going to extract the username. I'm going to put in my password. I'm going to do a next. Now it's going to look at my local repository, and it's going to see all of the change sets that have not been sent up to the remote repository. So I, in fact, have actually done 4 revisions or 3 revisions from a starting point, and I'm going to beam all of these up to the Bitbucket repo. So it's thinking about it right now. It's calling Mercurial, using those Mercurial binaries to connect my local repo over the internet up to the remote repo. It said it's done. So if I go in here and look at my repo now, sure enough, I see, hey, Russ created the repo. I see that there's several commits. If I look in the commits list, I can see the commits. Inside of each change set, I can see all of the things that got changed. So the initial change set, the initial commit, is actually pretty big. There's a lot of stuff in here, and it's differential. if I go back to commits and look at, let's say, this commit, then I see, oh, sure, just one thing got changed, and it showed me what got added and what got removed. And you can do a lot of different things. You can do side-by-side diffing between this one and another version. You can download the entire repo if you want to zip file, if you want to transport it or put it in somebody else's repository. But the idea here is now we're connected. So we have a copy on our local hard drive and we have a copy up here in Bitbucket. So if I go back now and I make a new change, let's just say I'm going to go into this thing. I'm going to say, well, I know that my boss didn't like orange, but maybe they'll like it if it's really big and orange. And maybe the problem was that this text was here. So I'll make a couple more changes. I just made some changes and I'm going to commit those changes. So we'll commit them. We'll say changed the UI significantly, and OK. You notice here that the revision number changed to 4, change set number, and now this is the tip because that's the latest revision. If I actually look over here in the repo on Bitbucket, if I refresh this page, nothing. I still have the original set of change sets. So if I go back into my local repo in Designer, right click on it, push it, and I can either just click finish, or if I want to see the change sets that are going to be pushed, I can choose next, and it's going to say, well, this change set hasn't been sent. Okay, and typically pushes don't take that long. Ooh, that's nice. So this is interesting. I know that in between this video and the last one, I made a change set and I kind of switched around inside of change sets. You got to be a little bit careful here with this one, because what's going on is I changed an earlier change set and made that the tip, but the remote repository thinks that revision 3 is the tip, and it's a little confused. As long as you know what you're doing, you know that there's a reason for this. What you can do is you can go back into your initial screen here and choose to force. Now, I'm comfortable that this is going to work out because I know what it's doing. If you weren't comfortable that you knew why it was barking about the force, you might want to really think about that. So this is kind of a decent opportunity here. So now I went back and I said, no, force the push. It's going to do its thing and it's going to say, all right, you told me to force, so I'm going to force it. Now I go back over here, let's do a refresh on the repo, and sure enough, it has our latest change. Life's good there. I said, oh great, you took out this stuff, you made it bold and font size 28 point. If I look at the overview, I can see all kinds of nifty stuff, like including all the history. But over here on the right hand side is some other information which we'll get to, but the one thing I wanted to point out to you was this is actually where the URL goes for the repo at this point. So you can always click in here and select it all and copy that to the clipboard. So at this point we have a local repo, a local repository. It has a remote connected repository. Whenever I make changes, I will commit them. Those change sets will go to my local repository. Whenever I feel good and ready, I'm going to push all those up to the remote repository, and that's how it works. So, and it's up to me. I could do 58 changes, then commit, and I could do 58 commits and then push. Or what most people kind of think works better is do a few changes, commit up, do a few more changes, commit it, and don't get a boatload of commit. It just depends on what you're doing. If you're working with a lot of other people and there's a lot of activity going on, you're going to want to commit more and push more. The opposite, of course, is that somebody else may have done a change in the repository, in which case you would want to pull from the repository. So just for a second, imagine that you had another team member who was working on a different part of the code right now, and they just pushed up some code. Well, first of all, you can set things up so you get an email that just says, hey, Fred Astaire just committed some code up to the repository. So now you've been alerted that there's new code up in the repository that's remote and you don't have it. So pushing is taking your repository and pushing your changes up. Pulling is the opposite. So if I need to pull any changes down from the repository, I would do a pull. It's going to have all this stuff. By default, it's going to say update after pull, which means after I'm done updating my local repository or pulling those changes down, go ahead and update the NSF. So there we go. We've got it connected. We have a local repository connected to the remote repository. In the next step, we're going to talk about using branches and tags.